signed an order to eliminate the Department of Education. A dramatic and unprecedented overreach of his authority as president. We're going to keep a close eye on the event for you. I'm not going to make you watch it. We will bring you any updates on any news that Trump makes. Now, no modern American president has tried to do what Donald Trump is doing today. That is, eliminate an entire cabinet-level department by fiat. And technically, he cannot do it. Trump does not actually have the power to turn the lights off at the Department of Education. That can only be done by an act of Congress, and it would need 60 votes in the Senate to overcome any filibuster. But the Trump administration, as they put it today, will do everything but close the DOE. The White House press secretary today telling reporters that today's executive order will make the DOE even smaller than it is right now. That's after the Trump administration axed nearly half the entire department. The gutting of the DOE could have impacts on Americans all across the board. Here's how fired DOE civil rights attorney and president of the union chapter representing department employees, Sharia Smith, put it on MSNBC earlier today.
The American public are going to feel the brunt of it. They're already feeling the brunt of the cuts that have been made since January 21st. We have not been able to work for the American public. American citizens who have filed civil rights complaints with the Office for Civil Rights have not received any relief because we've been forced not to, and now many of our attorneys have been laid off. Americans who are applying for financial aid or seeking loan forgiveness have not received any responses or answers from this agency because those people have been laid off, placed on leave, or told just not to work. And so what we'll have with this executive order is continuation of a complete stoppage of a public service.
And that is where we start today. The aforementioned Sharia Smith joins us. We are also joined by the president of Media Matters for America, Angela Carson, and Chasten Buttigieg is here at the table. He was a middle school teacher in Indiana and author of the book, I Have Something to Tell You. It is good to see you all. Sharia, we heard you in that clip talking about what it is going to mean for people who work at DOE, for teachers. What is it going to mean for America's kids that the DOE is being gutted?
The DOE administers student loans that helped American students receive educated teachers in a classroom. I used to teach 5th grade in the state of Texas, and I was a student in the state of Indiana, where I really did benefit from amazing teachers who receive student loans. I myself am a recipient of Pell Grants, and that allowed me to go to Harvard and graduate from Harvard and teach 5th grade in Donna, Texas, where my students were able to perform wonderfully. We're the #1 state exam participants and test scores in that district. And so what you have with the elimination of the Department of Education, particularly our largest division, federal student aid, is an elimination of the pipeline for educated and talented teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think about the fact, Chasten, that this move is coming when we already have a national teacher shortage crisis in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I cut my teeth as a teacher when I was in graduate school. I was on what they called an emergency permit in Indiana. We had no teachers, so if you had a bachelor's degree, you could teach in the classroom if you were pursuing your teaching license. And so I watched as many classrooms in our school had teachers leaving because they could get a better job somewhere else. The pay was low, the respect was low. That made me want to run into education. I cared so much about it. But watching these cuts happen in Washington makes me think about those teachers or students who might be on, the cusp of deciding whether or not to go into education. Do I really want to be a teacher? Is this the right career path for me? And I think this is going to scare a lot of people away from pursuing education, especially if they're dependent on Pell Grants like I was as a first-generation college student.
At a time when we have never needed those teachers more. Angela, there's a chapter on the Department of Education in Project 2025. That is not news to you. You have read through that document. You tried to warn people that this was the playbook they were going to run. The first line of that reads, federal education policy should be limited, and ultimately the federal Department of Education should be eliminated. The administration can't actually eliminate it, as you know, as anyone who sort of understands the basic mechanisms of this understand. What is it they are trying to win here? A symbolic victory?
No, they want something much bigger than that. I mean, and they've sort of been pretty transparent about it, especially in the last few months. they see the Department of Education and more broadly the education system as sort of indoctrinating people, young people, right at the beginning, that it's basically creating a whole pipeline of, liberal indoctrination. And, they've been pushing back at that on the edges. You've seen this pop up at the states where, they're messing with the curriculum, they're replacing some books with, PragerU, you've seen it. But what they're really trying to do here is not just some, very significant administrative bureaucratic reform. No, they're trying to get rid of the functions that the Department of Education provides. And that is 30% of it is to Title I, which is for low-income people. So that is designed to punish the school districts that have low incomes. That's 180,000 teachers, bam, right there, that rely extensively or exclusively on Title I funding that they want to get rid of. And then the other part of it, and this is sort of came up so far in the discussion, is through the grant-making programs for universities and loans, to either reduce that and the stuff that you can't reduce, privatize that. But this is about culture change. It is about eliminating and reducing an educated populace. And to the extent that you are keeping it in place by giving it back to the states, we know what that means. It means more power for the already dominant right-wing narrative that we're dealing with.
Sharia, we had Becky Pringle on, head of the National Education Association, the largest union in this country that represents teachers, and she pointed us to something that had happened out of Kentucky. They'd actually been given the opportunity, voters there, to consider this question of whether or not dollars for public school education should instead be spent on private education options. I want to read you something. This is from reporting from the local outlet, the Kentucky Lantern. Jason Bailey, executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, said he was not surprised that Amendment 2, the amendment I was just referencing, failed. The opposition to Amendment 2 was bipartisan, Bailey said. It was really defeated by a huge margin in many rural counties that also voted for Donald Trump. So Kentuckians are smart. They were discerning, and they saw this for what it was. It was a scam funded by outside billionaires to shift dollars away from public schools and to fund private school vouchers. And Kentuckians, by it looks like a very wide margin, said no. I mean, if they are doing this, Sharia, for the politics of it, there are indicators that across this country, when given the opportunity and when really put in plain language, right? You're going to take these dollars that are meant for your public schools, and we're going to take them out of those public schools and we're going to put them in private schools. That is not school choice. That is the choice for those schools. Not every community has a private school. Every community has a public school.
Absolutely, and in the Office for Civil Rights, the second largest division in the Department of Education, we've seen several complaints where American citizens in red states complained that their child was not, were not receiving their IEPs or 504 services in charter schools that had taken tax dollars. And instead of providing those services, the charter school said, oh, well, just go back to your neighborhood school that we've defunded. And it's funny that you mentioned Kentucky, because we currently, our union heard from a family in Kentucky that has an open sexual assault investigation complaint in the Office for Civil Rights, which was being worked on by attorneys in our Philadelphia office, which has been shuttered. Their elementary school age child was a victim of a sexual assault, and they received no relief from their school district or their state, and they used the federal government oversight arm for free recourse. And now they're without that recourse. Those are the things that the U.S. Department of Education did. We were not purveyors of woke ideology. We provided enforcement and oversight over the states.
Sharia, I want you to take a listen to what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said earlier today.
And the Department of Education plays a critical role in enforcing civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination. Who's going to do that now?
Any critical functions of the department, such as that, will remain. But again, we're greatly reducing the scale and the size of this department.
What about federal Title I funding and special education funding? Is that still good?
Same answer.
Sharia, devil is often in the details there. So they're keeping the function. They're just getting rid of some of the people who are supposed to carry out the function. How does any of that actually work?
It doesn't work. I have a BlackBerry in my kitchen right now. I can say I still have a BlackBerry, but does it actually function? No, it does not. In the same way, the Department of Education has not been functioning since this administration took office. They have slowed our work and they have fired our people. So what benefits what does it benefit American people to have a law on the book if you actually have no one to actually enforce that law?
Can you guys pull up for me the poll from last month? It showed that just 37% of voters supported getting rid of the Department of Education. So yes, Chasten, I take the point that Angela makes that they have convinced a subset of Americans that their children are being indoctrinated in American schools, even though there is no actual proof positive to that point. And those parents are worried and they are concerned. And yes, perhaps they want to see a dismantling of the Department of Education. That is nowhere near a majority of Americans who believe that that is a good idea.
Yeah, and I think parents are right to be concerned. As a parent myself, you know what it's like to get up in the morning and try to pack the school lunches and get everybody out the door, go to work, do a good job raising your kids and participating in society and giving back to your community. And now imagine that some parents around the country, especially folks who might have a child with a disability, are wondering, is this going to impact my family? Is this going to make things even harder? Especially seeing that we're gutting things like the Civil Rights Office. What happens when somebody makes a mistake or when somebody hurts my child, especially a child with disabilities who might need that lawyer to step in and say, give this kid what they need, meet the IEP. Imagine what it's like to just go to bed wondering, is life going to be made that much harder for me and my family and for my child? And as that poll shows, the majority of American people support public education and want this administration to just leave schools and teachers and families alone.
Yeah, Angela, who's going to stand up for my child? Who's going to advocate for my child? One would want to believe that among those answers would be the members of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, with whom the power in all of this actually lies. What is it that they are hearing now?
Yeah, I mean, well, and I'm so glad you pointed out how unpopular this is, because that's kind of the point here, right? Is that they get to do all these things that are deeply unpopular. Very few of the things in Project 2025 or that they're currently doing are popular, but they're doing them anyway. And they're making very clear that people can, that they can do it and get away with it. What you're hearing, if you listen to talk radio and people calling in, it's a very different story from the host than what the callers are saying or what you're hearing at town halls, which is you're hearing concerns and anxieties about how this is going to affect either the school or some of the programs that they've come to rely on, or just like the basic mechanics of what they've assumed have always been there. There is that brewing and simmering anxiety, and that's even before the effects have really even started to wash over. When we talked about Title I, and I think back to that Carolyn Levitt thing before, where it's like, oh, well, we're going to keep the critical functions. Project 2025 is clear. You start by getting rid of as much of the layer as you can. You hollow it out, but it's explicit. It is going to phase out Title I funding, period. And this is part of the phase out. You break it, and then you start to complain that it's broken. So you're certainly not hearing, at least most of the members of Congress, they've largely abdicated their responsibilities, especially Republicans, and to Trump. And that's the big issue here. And that's the pressure point that Democrats and the public really have to put on, is that there is a counterbalance here. And the fact that they're getting away with something so extraordinary. I mean, he's announcing today that he's going to break the Department of Education, that he's literally not going to do his job as the executive that has been assigned to him by the legislative branch. That's a major thing. And even within 2 months, we've all sort of come to accept that, yeah, this is just the way it's going to be now. And that itself is extraordinary and shows just how effective they've been able to move the needle at what is and what is not acceptable. So there really isn't anyone advocating for them.
Right, because, Justin, I understand that there was an appetite for shaking things up, that there are people all across this country who feel that the institution of government has not worked for them, has not serviced them. I get it. Sure. He is not shaking things up. He is screwing things up. Yeah. And the more that reaches the lives of people, either because you can't eat, not that you can't afford eggs, just can't buy eggs right now. You're seeing all of a sudden measles outbreaks in some communities. Your kid applying to college who's not sure whether or not you're actually going to be able to access Pell Grants. All of that uncertainty at some point begins to be felt in the populace itself.
I can feel it back home when I'm talking to neighbors in the grocery store. This is not what folks are worried about. And I think many people will meet you there and say, sure, we got to change some things.
Sure.
But if you really care about kids, you really care about teachers, you really care about making sure that American students have the best education system in the world, the first thing you do isn't break the Department of Education. And I think many teachers would welcome investment and a president who cared about making sure that every child in their classroom had every opportunity they could have. But as we've seen with the gutting of civil rights offices, laying off half of the workforce, that is not a president who's investing in education. That is a president who's hell-bent on breaking it. And if they truly believe in transparency, right, they keep saying fraud and abuse, if they truly care about transparency, then give me a list of everybody you fired and why they were fired and what they did. But they won't do that, right? And they'll just say, well, all of the functions remain, but half of the department isn't there anymore. And as somebody who cares deeply about kids getting a good education in this country, I want to see it on paper. But they're very good at lying, and they're very good at obfuscating and changing the subject. But this is not what you do if you care. This is what you do if you don't care.
Yeah, I mean, Sharia, we're watching the undoing, the dismantling. I wonder a lot about what is on the other side of this, right? Like, even if the line holds and Congress says, no, this is a bridge too far for us, even if all of the cases that are pending before judges go in the direction of returning us to where we were prior to this dismantling, to whom does the work then fall to put this back together again?
You know, the work should fall on the administration to correct its wrongs, but the work will fall, unfortunately, on the people who remain in the U.S. Department of Education, the dedicated public servants who always wanted to do this work. We didn't want to be fired. We were high performers, and we would love to go back into service. But it is going to take a long time. And I think this entire nation will have an education on how important elections are and how important civics are, and how important an independent and apolitical federal workforce is once, as they are experiencing now, the effects of unilateral and illegal executive action. Just another point, too, this wasn't a question, it was something that you asked, Chasten. But I am a product of public schools from the state of Indiana, Northwest Indiana, to be frank, and Title I schools that rely heavily on the U.S. Department of Education funding, schools that serve primarily Black and brown children. What has been completely troubling in this whole system is now publicly facing documents that threatened to end federal funding for local schools that are supposed to be in control, or local school districts who have decided to help their primarily Black and brown students. That is a fear that many of my friends who serve on the school boards in Northwest Indiana are facing about whether they will lose this necessary funding because they made the decision locally to help their students.
All right, we're going to continue this conversation. No one is going anywhere. Still to come for us, the only member of Congress from the very red state of Wyoming, one who is also very closely aligned with Donald Trump, seemed to choose Elon Musk over the hundreds of attendees at her town hall last night who were visibly and audibly protesting what is happening to the federal government. We're going to get to that. Plus, Democratic Congressman Jason Crow has some ideas on how to bring the Democratic Party back. He joins us here at the table for all of
Washington that day.
You are looking at live pictures from the White House. Donald Trump expected to speak any minute now, where he will sign an executive order to dismantle the DOE. Any news that comes out of that, we will let you know. We are back with Sharia, Angelo, and Chasten. Sharia, some new reporting I wanted to get you in on. The layoffs at the Department of Education have gutted a statistical office, the National Center for Education Statistics, that is responsible for the compiling of the nation's report card. It measures the academic performance of students across the country. For a bunch of tech bros who claim to be very focused on data-driven analysis, why get rid of the department that has all the data?
I asked that question to Congressman Brandon Gill's staffers, that very question, and that's when they got off camera because they couldn't answer it. It seems as if you do not want accountability at all. We've been blamed, our agency has been blamed for low test scores. We're not responsible for that, but certainly the Institute of Educational Sciences and the NCEE, which you just named, they are responsible for naming the data so we can know what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, what we need to improve upon. And now they've eliminated that so that there will be no one to check check anything or let them know, hey, you're not, what you've done is not going well. We have no data now to check their work.
Angela, help me understand something. Again, we're not taking the president's press conference live. We're monitoring it to see what he says and if he makes any news. Your sense of what he will say, and then your sense of how it will play in the right-wing echo chamber.
And I'll start with what he's going to say. He's going to say that they're actually empowering states, and that this was sort of just a gigantic waste, and it does nothing but sort of, prop up, federal workers who are already getting paid too much to do very little, and they're sort of cleaning out the waste and making the system more efficient. That's what he's going to say, or some version of that. How it's going to play in the right-wing media initially is celebration and excitement. This isn't like the top issue for the right-wing media. They're not just like clamoring away at, oh my God, the Department of Education is all I think about, it's all I want to talk about. I mean, they're products of it too. Many of them have had student loans or they're producers, like they know. But what they like is what this demonstrates, which is that he can do it. And what they like is that where this goes, because this is really the opening salvo in sort of this larger arc here, which is that this is the full-scale elimination of a department without having to go through Congress. Next up, and you're going to start to see him tee it up, is FEMA, right? They're going to want to privatize TSA. All this stuff is laid out. They're going to want to privatize the Department of Veterans Affairs and gut out its function. So that's where I think the right-wing media is going to talk about, is that they're going to use this not to sort of talk about the Department of Education. They're going to just assume it goes back to the states. Everything's fine. Instead, they're going to use this as an example of his change capacity and the fact that an aspirational as to how much more they can accomplish. And that's where they're going to talk about the stuff that's in front of them.
We saw how well, Justin, things went when states got to decide reproductive rights, access, and care. What does it mean for America, for America's teachers, for America's students, if all of a sudden it, quote unquote, goes back to the states? Well,
and I want to get to that. I just thought Angela made such a good point about this outrage that we should be feeling. They're short on their budget, right? They're going after all of these departments because they say there's this gap. We got to make up for it. And I think it's just notable that the first people they're coming after to take funds away from in order to give the tax cuts to their billionaire friends are our kids. So some of the first people that they've decided to hurt are kids abroad and kids here at home. Education going to the states, it's important for folks to know that the majority of educational funding in the states for schools comes from the state. So the Department of Education really only makes up about 10 to 14% of education budgets within the state. So it's important to remember that those programs that the government is coming in to help you with are the offices of civil rights, making sure that students with disabilities have equitable access to education, making sure that we can apply these discretionary funds to schools, right? So if there's something that you want to innovate in your school, which is often an argument they use for school choice, that the government's there to help too. Like if you have students with autism who might need iPads, maybe you have some nonverbal students who could use some iPads, the government can step in and help you with that. When we're gutting these funds, we're taking all of this money away from our kids, we're depriving them of opportunity and we're depriving them of freedom. And I think the majority of parents in this country are seeing this today and wondering how that has anything to do with making America great when we're just hurting kids and hurting families.
Chasten Buttigieg, thank you so much for being at the table with me. Angela Corazon, Sharia Smith. Sharia, you texted me, you and I are college classmates and friends, and reminded me that it is not lost on either of us that if it were not for the power of this agency and the power of Pell, we would not have the benefit of being in each other's lives. So thank you so much for your time today. When we come back, it's beginning to look like a regular thing. Republican voters.
That DOJ has done, which is it's so bizarre to me how obsessed you are with federal government. But here's the thing.
No wonder Republicans are being told to avoid those town halls. That was the reaction Harriet Hageman received from her constituents for her support of Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency's cuts to the federal government. Those same constituents who elected Donald Trump in November by over 45 points. Last night, as you saw, booing the role his co-president, Elon Musk, has had in dismantling the federal government. all while he openly brags about cutting programs like Medicaid and Social Security. As Democrats have slowly been finding their footing and winning the message war against Donald Trump, moments like last night in Wyoming show the opening that the Trump administration and DOJ have given their opposition party. Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado and Minnie Tamaraju, president of the group Reproductive Freedom for All. What did you think about that video outside of the sort of Evita stagecraft of it all?
Well, people should be upset. And the people in that audience clearly were, because what's happening now is Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans campaigned off of culture warfare issues, and now they're trying to fulfill promises based on those culture warfare issues. And guess what? Fulfilling those promises means cuts to health care, cuts to Social Security, cuts to important rural programs for education. If they actually follow through and cut the Department of Education and the Title I funding, or they take the Title I funding and they transition it to block grants or to the states, up to 180,000 teachers, mainly in rural, underserved communities, might lose their jobs. Right? These are people serving all of the people's kids in that audience. I am a product of public schools. I would not be here today if it weren't for those teachers, if it wasn't for some of that support for rural, underserved schools. I spent 10 years of my life in a very small town in the upper Midwest. This is important stuff, and it's life-changing for many people.
We have all this reporting about how Republican members in the House will quietly whisper to others about how they don't like it either, and how they're starting to hear from their constituents that their constituents are not happy, whether it's at these town halls that they've stopped going to or the phone lines that won't stop ringing. What do they quietly whisper to you?
Well, I don't give a damn what they quietly whisper to me anymore. Right? Like,
fair.
Listen, we're way beyond that
Yeah.
point. We're way beyond the point of having private discussions behind closed doors where they whisper to me how much they detest Donald Trump, or the fact that they wish we could be beyond Donald Trump. They had their chance. Years ago, they had their chance. We know who Donald Trump is. He has shown us over and over and over again who he is. He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do on the campaign trail, which is going to be devastating for tens of millions of Americans. Frankly, if you are not willing to have the courage to stand up and to fight for the people you represent, then you don't belong in office.
Right. I mean, Minnie, the reason that I am still curious about those whispers is because their margins are so thin. And I think there's sort of this fundamental question of what can happen between now and the midterms, and if it is necessary for the House of Representatives to hold the line. Are there people there who say, okay, this is my moment, this is my profile and courage, and I am listening to my constituents, and I'm going to do, you're looking at me like I have the naivete of a baby calf, but you know what I'm saying, which is we're all looking for a glimmer of hope here. And the fact that they know whether or not they are brave enough and bold enough to say it out loud, and the fact that our fellow Americans are showing up to town halls and districts that Donald Trump won and saying, no, not in our name, do not do this, it tells you that there is energy there.
Absolutely. So I was just in Wisconsin campaigning for Judge Susan Crawford for state Supreme Court. That race is frankly about abortion, but it's also an indictment on Elon Musk. He's dropped $12 million into a state Supreme Court race. And it's an indictment on money in politics, on corruption, and on this president. So the energy we felt on the ground, I was on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, was palpable. Young people are organizing. They are mobilizing on campus. In 2025, in March for an April election. It's there. We're seeing it in the town halls, but we're also just seeing it right now on the ground in Wisconsin. I made the face, Alicia, because I don't have a lot of optimism about Republican office holders showing courage. What I do have optimism in is the people, including folks who voted for Donald Trump, and young people who didn't turn out in the numbers we needed them to, but are now fed up and willing to fight back. I have optimism about that, and I'm encouraged by our own members. We're a membership organization who've been doing weekly phone banks and calls and showing up in record numbers to participate. That's what gives me hope, and that's what I think will shift congressional opinion if we continue to put all the energy and mobilization behind that.
And Congressman, if Democrats are able to articulate a vision that actually wants, that brings people into the fold. You wrote this in the New York Times about the effort to rebuild the reputation of the party. You go into rural areas, you go into red areas, you hang out with the people I grew up with, and they just straight up think a lot of Democrats don't respect them, that they're deplorables. I still hear that word come out of so many places when I'm talking to people, when I'm trying to earn their trust. How do you earn their trust?
Well, first of all, this isn't my opinion, it's just true, right? And you can't come off an election where we did not win. We didn't retake the House, we didn't retake the Senate, we didn't keep the Senate, we didn't take the White House, and say that we're crushing it on all the fronts. Now, there's great Democrats doing amazing things in a lot of places around the country, but clearly in the areas where we need to win, which are red areas and Trump areas, to rebuild political power and stop Donald Trump and to save our country, the project of my lifetime, we need to reach these folks, which means that culture issues and issues of identity are very important. And it means, listen, I'm not an economist, right? I grew up working construction. I started working when I was 15 at Arby's and the McDonald's. I have worked my entire life since I was 15. And what I know is the people in those areas, the people that I grew up with, they don't want solutions. They don't want somebody to tell them exactly how to live their life or to give them a handout. They just want a level playing field. They just want the opportunity. And that's what the Democratic Party actually is. It is the party of working people, right? We are going to level the playing field, and we're going to ensure fairness so that people can work hard and make their life better.
Okay, how do you do that when you are on an asymmetric playing field with a party and a leader of that party who are like a kid running for class president who's like, we're going to have a carnival at school. We're going to everything you've ever dreamed of. Manufacturing, it is coming back to America, right? Like, how do you contend with some of the things that they are promising that are simply not possible?
Well, first of all, you have to be honest with people, right? You can't make promises you can't keep, because you'll lose credibility, which actually is what Donald Trump is doing right now. He's going to lose credibility and he's going to lose support. But if we are consistent, if we tell people the truth in a bold and firm way, if we show energy and fight and fire when we need to, but we work with people also when we need to, if we show up and if we are consistent, and if we listen first, right? Democrats sometimes think that we're having a policy discussion. And what we don't realize is that until people understand that you care for them and you'll listen to them, they don't care what your policy prescription is. So we can come up with all the 21-point white papers we want, but we have to connect and we have to listen to people first. And that is the ultimate step.
All right, Congressman Crow, Mini Timaraj, I'm going to ask you both to stick around just ahead what Tim Walz is saying about Elon Musk.
Saying on my phone, I don't know, some of you know this on the iPhone, they've got that little stock app. I added Tesla to it to give me a little boost during the day. 225 and dropping. So, and if you own one, we're not blaming you. You can take dental floss and pull the Tesla thing off, and take out, just telling you.
I mean, give the man a Netflix comedy special. We are back with Congressman Crow and Mini Timaraj. Mini Tim Walz has been on the ground in Wisconsin. You mentioned you have been there as well. The thing I want to make sure that we impart to our viewers is this is not just about Wisconsin. This election has consequences for all of us. Talk me through it.
Well, I've just really missed Tim Walz. That was just delightful to see. Look, what happens in Wisconsin is going to be a bellwether for how we talk about these issues. And frankly, what Elon Musk and Donald Trump feel empowered to do in other states, right? So we know that abortion is a driving issue in the state Supreme Court race. Wisconsin's got a lot going on with regard to, a pre-1800s abortion ban on the books that they're still hearing the case over. Remember, in 2023, we had Judge Janet Protasiewicz win a really tough, hard-fought, expensive state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin on that issue alone. So we know what's going to happen in this race is going to shape how the other side invests, what they think they can take on. And frankly, if Elon Musk and Trump allies are successful in putting extremist Brad Schimmel on that court, who has said the easiest way to ban abortion in Wisconsin is through the state Supreme Court and electing him, if they're successful, it's going to embolden them to dump the unlimited cash he has in countless other state and local races. And it's going to fundamentally reshape the way that we're thinking about elections moving into 2026. So we are all hands on deck in Wisconsin. The good news is Wisconsinites know how to do this. They're fighters. They know how to fight back. And we have the momentum on our side. But man, that money advantage is really, really terrifying.
Congressman, let's talk about the money, but first let's talk about sort of the Elon Musk of it all. Where do you see him when you imagine sort of a narrative strategy for Democrats?
Well, he's a billionaire acting as billionaires do. They're trying to raise money. They're trying to pad their own pockets. You know, this is somebody who's one of the largest defense government contractors in the country, and he's been given the keys to every government agency by Donald Trump. Not only that, there's zero congressional oversight. Nobody really can even say what his job is. There's no accountability. There's no insight into what he's doing, and people are pretty pissed off about it, and they should be. Right? Because he has access to their Social Security systems. We have access to the payment systems. And he's the one who's deciding what to cut and what not to cut when he has a vested interest in all of these programs. So people see what's going on here. It's not okay. But, you know, it's worth saying, though, that DOGE and these calls for reform are actually an outgrowth of a legitimate issue. Right? Legitimately, there does need to be government reform. There is fraud, waste, and abuse. There is inefficiency.
This is widely agreed upon.
It's widely agreed upon. It takes years. It takes, you know, close to a decade to build a bridge in America, right? I've been going through Denver Airport because I'm from Colorado for the last 5 years, and it's still under construction, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. So people see this stuff. Now, DOGE is not the answer. We know that. It's going to cause a ton of damage and impact millions of people's lives. But this is an opportunity for Democrats to say, we are the party of reform, that we have an alternative, that we do believe that it needs to be fixed. We're not going to defend institutions, but we are going to do is make sure the government works for you, right? And it works efficiently and effectively, and it delivers good services.
When you talk, Minnie, about the money that is pouring into that race, where do you see that pattern continuing as we move into midterms?
Well, we've got races in Virginia, New Jersey, Kentucky, pretty contested ones. And we've got even state and local municipal races. We're talking about, I don't know how much we think about the number of leaders in this country that are run by folks who are elected. You know, we've got these statewide races, but we're also gearing up for what's going to be a very difficult and tumultuous 2026. Look, I think that how Democrats operate, and I agree with the congressman, we need the passion, we need the fight, we need to see Democrats out there fighting for us authentically on the issues that matter. I think how we organize and how we, on the progressive side, on the third party side, I include myself and my organization, we're organizing our members in the toughest, reddest places in the country right now because we want to be ready to win as much as we can in 2026. That mobilization and that spending has to come now. But when it comes to dark money, we're up against really some scary stuff. And it's money that's mostly independent expenditure. It's money that doesn't have to be reported or coordinated. And, you know, I can organize hundreds of thousands of Americans on the issue of reproductive freedom. They can spend millions on disinformation and misinformation. So the organizing, the people-to-people work is going to be critical to combating and pushing back on that disinfo and misinfo. And you really can't replace the good old school person-to-person communication that we all need to be doing at record numbers right now.
When you were in district, when you were talking to your constituents, what's the number one thing you hear?
People just want government to work for them. They want to be able to raise their families, own a home, have the American dream. But the simple fact is the American dream is out of reach for most Americans. You know, right? You can't own a home. You can't retire, save for retirement with dignity. And most people can't afford to send their kids to school. And until we come to terms with the fact that that is out of reach and we have to work like hell to get it back, and Democrats will be the party that will do it, we're just going to be shouting into the void. Right? We have to acknowledge that that is true, and that is the lived experience for most Americans right now.
It is a lived experience for most Americans. Someone, was asking me about the millennial, my generation's or distaste for institutions or lack of trust in institutions. I was trying to explain them. Like, we came of age during September 11th. Our generation disproportionately served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We took on more student debt than any generation before us. We then graduated, if you were lucky enough to go to college, into one of the worst job markets in American history. So, yeah, it's no surprise that we looked around and said, well, I don't know that these institutions are really here to serve me. I do wonder, beyond the rhetoric, part of the problem is the proof needs to be in the pudding. And they are making that, they being Republicans and DOJ, are making that more difficult because they are actually servicing their own narrative, right? They have said government doesn't work, and now they have made it so that government can't work. And I'm not sure how Democrats get around that short-term disadvantage.
Well, the secret is there is no secret. There's no slogan. There's no secret mixture of things that's going to get us out of this problem. Getting out there, rolling up our sleeves, doing town halls, connecting with voters, getting on the ground, like Minnie is in Wisconsin and her organization, putting in the work and connecting with people one at a time is what's going to get us out of this. Right? And that's hard, and that might be difficult for some people to grasp. That we're looking for the grand slam, we're looking for our version of Donald Trump, we're looking for the great orator. Maybe that person will come along and be able to consolidate support around the country, but probably not. We're going to have to work hard in tough places. We're going to have to go to places where we're uncomfortable, places where Donald Trump has been winning, and we're going to have to make the case one person at a time.
You forgot, you just need a Joe Rogan to the left. If you had a Joe Rogan to the left, everything would be different.
Exactly.
That's the silver bullet.
Exactly.
Minnie, this idea, the secret is there is no secret. I think that is the slogan. I think that is the bumper sticker. I think what I'm hearing from both of you is the work is where it is at.
Well, the only thing I'd add is we're the ones who need to save ourselves. There's no magical third party. There's no magical podcaster. There's no super celebrity candidate that's going to swoop in and save Democrats and all of their allied organizations and issues. It's the people. And as long as we are the party of the people are the most powerful element in this entire equation. So we can restore that faith and trust in the American people to our coalition and show them that our coalition is going to fight for them. I think we're on the path. We're on the right path.
Minnie Tamaraju, thank you so much. Congressman Jason Crow, thank you so much for being at the table with us. We're going to sneak in a quick break. We'll be right back. Pam Bondi's Justice Department today took control of gun rights restoration, removing the authority from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives and placing it squarely in the hands of her office. Two officials have told NBC News that the Attorney General plans on using that new authority to restore gun rights to roughly 20 individuals during the initial rollout. It is not clear if actor Mel Gibson will be included in that. However, the head of the Office of the Pardon Attorney says she believes she was fired for refusing to add Mel Gibson's name to the list of individuals who identified as possible gun rights restoration candidates. The others had been previously convicted of nonviolent crimes, while Mel Gibson, supporter of President Donald Trump, lost his gun rights after a 2011 domestic violence misdemeanor conviction. We're going to stay on this story, but up next, the federal judge in the case around Trump's deportation flights calling the Justice Department's response woefully insufficient. Much more news straight ahead, right after a quick break. Everyone, it is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. As Judge Esther Salas said on this program earlier this week, we need to trust the process of this country's judicial system, where cases are brought, judges make rulings based on the law. Disagreeing with those rulings, that's permitted. People have every right to criticize a judge's decision. But we're seeing those disagreements and criticisms now reach new heights. The New York Times has new reporting about judges fearing for their safety. The threats and intimidation may have not become actual violence, but they appear to be mounting as Mr. Trump, his advisors, and his supporters are questioning almost daily the legitimacy of the American legal system. There is no evidence that jurist judgment in the high-profile cases before them has been warped by their antagonists. But at the least, public perceptions of judicial decisions could be shaped by the volume of attacks on the courts. The attempts at intimidation have taken many forms: bomb threats, anonymous calls to dispatch police, SWAT teams to home addresses, even the delivery of pizzas, a seemingly innocuous prank, but one that carries a message. Those threats coming as this week Donald Trump has openly called for the impeachment of Judge James Boasberg, who ruled against him over the flights deporting hundreds of Venezuelan nationals. Just last hour, we heard from the judge who had asked the DOJ to submit answers to questions about those flights by noon today. He said that the government, quote, evaded its obligations by not giving any new details in its answers. The government said it needed more time to consider how to answer. A reply, which Judge Boasberg said is woefully insufficient. The Justice Department said the judge was carrying out inappropriate judicial overreach and that it was, quote, superfluous questioning of sensitive national security information. All of this only furthering the animus toward the judge who is just trying to determine whether his order was violated by this administration and who is now the target not just of the president, but of Republicans in Congress as well. Congressman Brendan Gill of Texas followed Trump's lead, introduced articles of impeachment against Judge Boasberg, a move Congressman Lauren Boebert has said she supports. Elon Musk yesterday made several $6,600 donations, the maximum allowed, to Representatives Gill and Boebert, along with 5 other lawmakers who expressed support for impeaching judges who have ruled against or halted elements of Trump's agenda. A remarkable doubling down on an action Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts rebuked in a rare statement earlier this week. And that is where we start this hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman is here. Also joining us, former Democratic Senator and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill. And with me at the table, Chief Political Columnist and host of the Impolitique podcast for Puck, MSNBC National Affairs Analyst John Heilman. All right, Harry, let's talk about what just happened between the government and Judge Boasberg. What do we know?
Okay, first, you're really right, Alicia, to emphasize this is just Boasberg trying to find out if his orders were violated last Saturday night when he said, turn those planes around, don't take them anywhere. Since then, there are indications that they were squirrely or they knowingly relied on unlawful suppositions. Boasberg is trying to get to the bottom of it. He is here, a dog with a bone, because he wants to know. And now, do we have an administration on our hands that is prepared to simply disobey judges' orders? In response, they're doing 2 things, the administration. First, they're saying, oh, this is so picayune, you're just beating a dead horse. On the other, they're offering every possible excuse about why even telling him the information that he's asked, like schedules of the planes that left Saturday and the like, is a terrible violation of national security. Boasberg, remember, was the head of the FISA court, deals with classified information all the time. The administration has let much of this out publicly. They are trying to just get through the actual judgment. Did they violate this order? Then we'll move on to Alien Enemies Act. But Boasberg is drawing a line. He wants to right now figure that out and potentially hold them in contempt or do whatever. He's decided now is the time rather than later to figure it out. It's all he's doing. He's given them 3 different one-day extensions, and they've just come in today, an hour ago, giving him nothing for what he asked for. They are playing with fire.
Claire, what do you think they're doing here?
Well, they think, I mean, here's what clearly is going on. This administration thinks that they will somehow be able to be more powerful than our judicial system. That somehow their executive power has more weight than the rule of law. And that's not the way our Constitution is designed, and that's not the way we have conducted business in the United States of America. And I think it's important here to realize that this is one case, but Alicia, there's a number of cases. And a Stanford political science professor has done an analysis of all the cases and decisions that have been made so far in this Trump administration and compared it to decisions in the first administration. And what is glaringly different this time is that you're seeing the same percentage of conservative judges, centrist judges, and liberal judges rule against Donald Trump, because they are bringing really big cases challenging the Constitution. And when you get to that point, judges leave their political biases aside. They leave their ideology aside. And they look at the Constitution and the rule of law, and they make rulings according to how our country is supposed to be run. So he may get by this case with just a contempt, and maybe a judge finds now or on appeal that they're using this Byzantine law appropriately. Maybe not. But the point is, there's going to be a lot more cases, and there are going to be a lot more decisions, and they are going to have more and more Trump judges, Bush judges, Republican appointed judges come down against them. And you know what? Let me just tell you this right now. Nobody's getting impeached. It's not happening. Can't happen. It's a 2/3 vote in the Senate. Can't happen. So all this is political theater, animating their base in a way that's very dangerous to people who sit on the bench.
Well, and one of the tells that is political theater, John, is the fact that they're doing it, but they can't quite tell you why they're doing it. So here's Jim Jordan on CNN when asked about that.
What specifically has Judge Boasberg done that you believe is an impeachable offense under the constitutional description of high crimes and misdemeanors?
All I'm saying is if you're acting in a political fashion and not just, following the law, ruling on the law, and I would argue that, frankly, just his ruling in and of itself, remember, the Constitution is pretty clear. Article 2, Section 1, very first sentence says, power in the executive branch shall be vested in a president of the United States.
They're telling on themselves.
Well, yes, and I rarely ever said anything. This isn't really complimentary about Jim Jordan, but I don't necessarily think Jim Jordan is even for this. I don't think there's much appetite. Claire is obviously right about the fact that it's not going to happen because of the Senate, but I think even in the House Republican caucus, where there's a small cadre of extreme people, some extreme freedom caucus people, Jim Jordan is obviously one of those people, but in this instance, the reporting that I have and the reporting that other people have up on the Hill is that there are a lot of Republicans who are like, we are biting off a lot right now. We are about to head into this budget battle. We're about to head into this wood chipper on the Medicaid politics. We are hearing it from our constituents over Elon Musk and Doge. We don't need this fight because we know it's not going anywhere in the Senate. It's not going to accomplish anything. But the fear is, like everything else, it's all fear-driven in the Republican Party. The fear is that a fringe theory that is not even among far-right House members, but a fringe theory in the MAGA media space that takes hold on X can move very quickly into the mainstream when Donald Trump endorses it. And so they're, as often is the case, they're terrified of Donald Trump. And I think Jim Jordan, you look at him, you've seen Jim Jordan when his heart is in something, but he doesn't know what he's talking about.
No, he was like pivot to constitutional talking points.
Yeah, it wasn't just that he didn't have anything to pin on the judge. It's that it didn't seem like his heart was even in it. He was kind of just like, I kind of don't really want to talk about this.
Well, let me ask you, if you have congressional Republicans sort of pumping the brakes or just saying, like, not right now, who then is driving the bus inside the Trump administration that's saying, no, we need to do this in the first 2 months?
Donald J. Trump, I think, is doing this, and I think there are others. I mean, look, Pam Bondi is clearly not shockingly, appallingly on board for this. She has got, if anybody thought, all sensible people understood what was happening, that Trump was trying to politicize the Justice Department. But if you had any doubt about that, when she weighed in yesterday, I believe, on Fox News, and basically said, this judge has no right to even ask these questions, basic questions. When did the flight take off? When did the flight turn around? When was it over international water? Her position is extraordinarily, it's extraordinary to hear an attorney general ever be that political. It's just a political statement. And to do it and to be that political as attorney general while attacking essentially a sitting federal court justice. I don't know enough of the history. Maybe John Mitchell did something that terrible when he was the attorney general for Richard Nixon, because he was a genuine, actual felon, a crook. But I've never seen an attorney general do either one of those things alone, let alone together, be that political and in the process attack a sitting federal district court judge. It's completely out of bounds. So I think, Donald Trump has his enablers in the Justice Department and the FBI, but I think the train, as always, on this issue, again, you listen to him at that Justice Department speech, he wants a war with the judiciary. He wants it.
Well, part of that war, Harry Littman, our friend Lisa Rubin reminded us, there have been 4 federal judges that Republicans have filed articles of impeachment against, all people who've made rulings about DOJ that Trump world doesn't like. And here is something more about judges from yesterday's press briefing.
How does a president define a bad judge? Is it just someone who disagrees with him? And is that a dangerous precedent in this case? Because this is a temporary ruling from Judge Boasberg that he could ultimately rule in your favor. Is he setting up a standard here for calling for the impeachment of a judge who may ultimately rule on your side?
No, it has nothing to do with disagreeing with the president on policy. It's with disagreeing with the Constitution and the law. And it's trying to usurp the authority of the executive branch of this country. It's having baseless reasoning for these injunctions. And it's a clear effort by these judges to slow roll this president's agenda.
Oh my God, it feels like it's opposite day, Harry Littman. I mean, if you have read the Constitution, then you understand that the whole point of the judiciary is to be a check on the executive branch.
And they haven't. You remember Anthony Scaramucci saying he couldn't get to the Third Amendment before Trump waved him off. Look, there is literally zero basis for what they're saying. But I'm not sure it's so benign. Yeah, of course they're not going to impeach people, but it is so untoward and so. And by the way, they chose the wrong guy to pick on, though they don't have the faintest idea. Boasberg, down the middle guy, appointed first by George H.W. Bush, then by Obama, roomed with Brett Kavanaugh at Yale Law School, hugely respected by all. And I think it's one of the reasons he's taken on himself to have this battle. But what else have they done? They've ignored the want to talk about unprecedented, the Chief Justice's statement saying you can't do this, and the administration is picking a fight with that. The day after, Trump does a fundraising email, says impeach, impeach, impeach. Elon Musk, whoever he is, gives the maximum that would be unethical even without this whole preface. But of course, it's incredibly stupid and asinine. And I just want to say it reminds me a little of January 6th itself, because this inflammatory rhetoric by Trump really could lead. You led with Judge Salas. Some judge could get hurt, and it's Trump's deep responsibility to tell his people who could be going out there and looking to do harm, no violence against judges. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying for any license to that. He's doing the exact opposite. He's dog whistling his supporters. They're attacking Boasberg's family, and it is a dangerous situation for the 700-plus federal district court judges nationwide.
Right, and I appreciate, Claire, that Harry brings up that acute threat, because there's also the existential threat. He's testing the lines. He's testing the boundaries, right? Like the fact that he's using the Alien Enemies Act first against immigrants doesn't mean that it ends with immigrants. He's trying to see what the court will allow him to do, with the possibility of extending some of those efforts to people who are here as legal residents, potentially to citizens. Likewise, he is testing what the courts will and will not stand for. So I think it's easy to see this simply in the context of the judiciary, but when you zoom out, this is an entire theory of an executive authority gone wild.
Yeah. And by the way, I do think if I was going to really criticize some of my former colleagues in Congress, it is that I don't think people have fully grasped, people who have been in the system for a long time and who have great faith in our constitutional checks and balances, I don't think they've yet fully grasped how far this guy has gone so quickly. He's gone much further than Orban ever did, or Erdogan, or any of these autocrats across the globe that have tried to shut down the free press, use censorship, tried to change higher education in this country so that you are censoring and ousting anyone who disagrees with the executive's position. He is really taking this to a place that is absolutely autocratic, absolutely saying, forget the checks and balances. I've got a Congress that is bending the knee to me. I don't have to worry about them. I can do whatever I want. Congress is not going to stop me, even though it's a very small majority he has in the House particularly. And now he's going after the other branch so that he's got no guardrails in his administration like he did last time. He's wanting to have a field with no defenders of the Constitution. He wants to blow it up and be in charge. And frankly, way too many people who know better in his party are going along with it quietly. I cannot believe there have not been more United States senators, especially those on the Judiciary Committee, that have not spoken up about what he's doing, calling for the impeachment and therefore endangering the federal judiciary.
Speaking of United States senators, hear what Chuck Schumer had to say about the efforts by Republicans to impeach judges. This is a preview of a conversation that our colleague Kristen Welker had for Meet the Press. It's going to air on Sunday. But take a listen now.
Look, Donald Trump is a lawless, angry man. He thinks he should be king. He thinks he should do whatever he wants, regardless of the law. And he thinks judges should just listen to him. Now, we have to fight that back in every single way. And we actually have had over 100 cases in the courts where we've had a very good record of success. So Donald Trump, infuriated by that success, said judges should be impeached. Let me tell Donald Trump and the American people, Democrats in the Senate will not impeach judges, full stop.
I understand, John Heilman, that there have been a lot of wins in the courts.
Yeah.
The courts were not built to be institutionally the ones that exclusively hold the line on this. They will need the House of Representatives. They will need the U.S. Senate. Did that answer give you any faith that the line will hold?
I don't know that the answer gave me any particular faith, because it is the case that what really you're saying is, and I totally agree, the courts are an incredibly important guardrail. They're an incredibly important bulwark against the balance of powers getting knocked out of whack, and also against some of the more pernicious things that Trump wants to do. But the legislative is really, in a lot of ways, supposed to be the most powerful branch of the three. They're co-equal branches, but the legislative, because it represents in such a more fine-grained way, and because there are so many of those members, it kind of plays a super important role in our tripartite role of balance of powers in government, and the abandonment of any responsibility like that on the Republican side. So when we say that, the reason I don't look to Chuck Schumer
because you can do math.
Because because I can do math. Because in the end, what you're saying when you're saying we need the legislative to be the legislative,
you need Republicans.
Is we need Republicans to take their institutional responsibility seriously. And as little as there has been any sign that Donald Trump respects the courts or respects the traditional role of the Justice Department, the FBI, and so on, there's been even less sign that Republicans in Congress have any interest in performing the duties that the legislative body, especially the legislative majority, is supposed to perform in our government right now. They have ceded everything to Donald Trump. They have no interest in being a counterbalance. You can see that in the Speaker of the House in particular with Mike Johnson. You can also see it with John Thune. No one is standing up to Donald Trump on anything ever from the time that he's won the second term. And so it's a profoundly dangerous thing. And just to say to Harry's point, when I was saying that Trump that judges wasn't going to get impeached, I don't think that's. I did not mean to cast that in any way as being benign. Yeah. I just mean that that I think there's a larger game afoot here, and it's not just about the threat of impeachment is something Donald Trump can put in Truth Social posts, and it might go nowhere, but it totally inflames the base. There's the worry about violence, but there's also this thing that's playing out where they are trying to find a way for Trump to defy court orders while saying, "I'm not defying court orders." I don't know how that's all going to play out, but that's why this challenge is so important, because he would like to be able to say, "I have never defied a court order, and I will never defy a court order," even as, functionally speaking, what his lawyers are doing right now is defying a court order.
I have so many more questions. Luckily, no one is going anywhere. When we return, the Trump administration is increasingly basing its decisions about who can be in this country on politics, and specifically people's opinions about Donald Trump. Brand new reporting about a French scientist stopped by border agents and sent home because he'd been critical of Trump's cuts to science research. We're going to have that story next. Plus, the Trump administration all in on Tesla days after Donald Trump essentially did a commercial for Elon Musk's electric car company on the White House lawn. His Commerce Secretary is urging Americans to buy Tesla stock. And in a move that could backfire big on Trump and the Republicans, new changes are setting up its weaponization of the U.S. immigration system to target speech they don't like, including simple criticism of Donald Trump himself. The New York Times reports that earlier this month, a French scientist on his way to attend a conference was turned away at the border. The Times writes this, quote, "The U.S. authorities denied entry to the scientist and then deported him because his phone contained messages, exchanges with colleagues and friends in which he expressed his personal opinion of the Trump administration's science policies." Philippe Baptiste, France's Minister for Higher Education and Research, said. It's part of a broader move by the Trump administration to quash dissent. Earlier this week, a Georgetown fellow was detained for what his lawyers say were politically motivated reasons. Politico reporting, quote, "Masked agents arrested Badar Khan Suri, an Indian national and postdoctoral fellow, outside his home on Monday night," his lawyer said. The agents identified themselves as being with the Department of Homeland Security and told him the government had revoked his visa. Suri has no criminal record, has not been charged with a crime, his petition says. Suri's lawyer, Hassan Ahmad, argued in his petition that Suri is being punished because of the Palestinian heritage of his wife, who is a U.S. citizen. And because the government suspects that he and his wife oppose U.S. foreign policy toward Israel, this is just another example of our government abducting people the same way they abducted Mahmoud Khalil, Ahmed said. Just last hour, a federal judge ordering that Suri not be removed from the United States without a court order. Suri's arrest is another worrying sign that the Trump administration is willing to go to extraordinary means to silence speech they disagree with, including ignoring the United States Constitution. The New York Times is reporting that the Trump administration lawyers have determined that the Alien Enemies Act allows them to enter homes without a warrant. What could possibly go wrong? We are back with Harry, Claire, and John. Claire, you said something earlier about the fact that Trump is, way out ahead of Orban or Erdogan. I mean, we were told throughout the campaign he's going to take the Orban playbook. He has studied the Orban playbook, and he is going to run it. The fact that he is now outpacing those authoritarians, using the power of the state to punish people who criticize its leader, where does that mean we are?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the American public, especially Republicans who have been so worried. I mean, I'm in a state that's pretty red, Alicia. And you know what you hear when you go out to the red parts of my state, which I did for many, many years, and listening to people complaining about me, is the heavy hand of government. They don't want government in their lives. They don't want government on their property. They don't want government to have anything to do with being able to impair their ability to own property or own guns. And here we've got a government who's now saying they can walk in a house without a warrant. That's pretty bold. And by the way, let's mention also the impact this is going to have on higher education. Americans need to understand that one of the reasons we are the most powerful and wealthy country in the world is because our higher education system has attracted the best minds across the globe. The best minds across the globe have come to America for higher education because they know we have the cutting edge research. We have basically protection around higher education so that great minds can make great discoveries and find great progress and prosperity. We are sending a message to the rest of the world: don't come here. Don't come here. If you're from a foreign country, we don't want you involved in our higher education. We don't want your mind. We certainly don't want you in our country. That is going to have a dramatic impact on peace and prosperity in this country for every American, and it will happen over the next several decades if this doesn't get reversed.
Right. I mean, at what point does America first become America last? Harry, the Alien Enemies Act, just a refresher for those who perhaps have not been following, is clearly a wartime act, wartime law that has not been used against a single nationality since the Japanese internment, one of the darkest periods in our country's history. The fact that not only are they invoking Alien Enemies Act, but saying that they believe they can use it to enter people's home. It is as though we have learned nothing from our own history, Harry.
World War II, Alicia, but that was one of only 3 times in our history. Even in 1798, when we passed it, because we were worried about France, we didn't invoke it. And look, what it says is if we're at war, everyone knows we're not, or if a foreign country has done a incursion. So he's trying somehow to say that this transnational drug group is the equivalent. This is something that screams out a judge is going to need to determine, right? And this is what Boasberg has. In fact, is this a foreign government in the equivalent of war? That could matter. And hey, by the way, some of these people say we are not even in this group. Can a court, as has always been the case, including after 9/11, determine that? That's what's on the line. And this is of a piece with the other story you were just talking about. It's trying to find the areas of greatest latitude for an executive and then expand the heck out of them by basically saying, oh, this is national security and I get to do it. I just want to second Claire's point for a second and say there's a really good article in The Atlantic by Princeton President Chris Eisgruber that has shown starting in the 40s or 50s, there was this extremely fruitful partnership between the federal government and research institutions in this country that have led to all, not just have been the talent, have made America the envy of the world, and so everyone comes here, but the discoveries, all the health stuff that is now being challenged, the bottom line impact for the good of the people that is just being destroyed. And if tomorrow this were all somehow frozen, it would take us months, maybe years, to try to reassemble all the rubble that they've created already. This is a really long range and lamentable trend.
And it's already having impact on people's lives. John, you have Trump allies saying that they are thinking about the possibility of revoking citizenship. This is from Axios. We're not putting all eggs in one basket. That's why we're seeing all efforts to remove people, said a senior Justice Department official. And the official said, we have other plans. One of those other plans, stripping U.S. citizenship from naturalized Americans. What's going to be on the horizon are denaturalization cases, said Mike Davis, a close White House ally and founder of the conservative Article 3 project. It's worth it. Okay. I understand they start with not even just immigrants. They start with who they purport, though we know that this is not true, to be gang members. Turns out a lot of those people were never in gangs. They got picked up because they had tattoos. Then they say, okay, now we're just going after immigrants who have no criminal history. And then they say, well, there may be some folks who've been granted U.S. citizenship from whom we are going to revoke it. I don't know about you. I know parents who have adopted children who are getting all of their paperwork in order. I know people who have the capability of having more than one passport who are getting it lined up because they recognize that your citizenship will not protect you, especially if you're a naturalized citizen in this country. And I think that there is a certain amount that people are willing to accept for the people who are not them. But when all of a sudden that threat comes home, it becomes much more real.
Well, yeah. Look, this falls into the category of something that we are quite reasonably speculating about, but not something that that we're quite there yet. And I always think there's not because this administration is not capable of doing
no,
things
I appreciate that caveat.
It's just because we've so often speculated about things the Trump administration in the first one and the second one might do. They sometimes either because of incompetence or because barricades get thrown up by the courts or by some other guardrail, they don't get that far. But if I were in a situation where I had a family member who could be affected by that hypothetical scenario, I would be scared as hell right now about where this is all headed. And the fact that...
But do you think it changes the politics of it?
There's no question that I go beyond what you said a second ago with respect to understanding that there are some of these Venezuelans who were sent, who were deported, who we have some really significant questions about whether or not they were in fact gang members. Again, the reason we want to get back to court is to find out who these people are, because I think there is a reality that a lot of people, many people in the country, would say that members of criminal gangs, the government has the right to deport those people. Maybe not to send them to a hellhole in El Salvador, one of the worst places on earth, but has a right to kick them out of the country. That's an overwhelmingly popular issue in America, and I think if ICE and the Trump administration decided to focus on criminals, who are here,
Which is what they promised.
who are in the country in an undocumented way, people who are committing criminal acts, not who are in some way, say, in a civil violation by being here in an undocumented fashion, but we're actual criminals, people out committing crimes. That's an 80% issue in America where people say the government has the right to get rid of them and we'd like to see them go. When you start to talk about the things you're talking about, I think, it starts to touch a lot more people's lives. And there are, you were talking about people that you knew. We have a very complicated polyglot country where people have all kinds of relations in their families or in their extended families or in their networks of friends who, when those things, if those worst case scenarios start to play out, the politics will change dramatically if they start to play out in that way.
Okay. Going to continue talking with this group when we return as Elon Musk helps Donald Trump dismantle the federal government from the inside, how Trump and his cabinet are going above and beyond to help the world's richest person get even richer. That story after. With unelected Trump advisor and top campaign donor Elon Musk's Tesla stocks struggling amid growing anger over his cuts across the federal government, the Trump administration took an unprecedented move last night to try to rescue it. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, a member of Trump's cabinet, went on national television to urge Fox News viewers to buy Tesla stock. Axios writes this, quote, cabinet secretaries don't typically recommend individual stocks, much less those linked to the president's closest advisor. His recommendation was potentially overshadowed, though, by one of Tesla's most fervent defenders on Wall Street, calling the company's situation a crisis. Harry, Claire, John are all back with us. Claire, I'm running out of words. That's not just, it's not unprecedented, it's unbelievable.
It's, I remember the days when an ethical transgression was a big deal. When someone had a financial conflict of interest where people went to great lengths to make sure that no one ever thought they were personally benefiting from government service, or in Musk's case, pretending like it's not government service when he's really running the whole damn thing. So this is really unbelievable that they are hawking Teslas on the White House lawn. That's bad enough. And then they have the Commerce Secretary telling people to buy the stock. Now, here's the problem Elon Musk has. He built a brand based on him. He built a brand that was marketed to college-educated people who believed in the future of electric vehicles. He built a brand that cannot be separated from the person Elon Musk. In many ways, it was like a meme stock. Now, he has actually shown himself to be someone and something that his customer base can't stand. And nothing they do with commerce secretaries is going to change that. Tesla's in trouble.
Tesla's in trouble. You have Axios reporting. This is what J.P. Morgan analyst Ryan Brinkman said in a research note about Tesla last week. We struggle to think of anything analogous in the history of the automotive industry in which a brand has lost so much value so quickly. How far, then, does Donald Trump go to leverage the U.S. government to save Tesla? The limit does not exist.
I have no idea. My brain, when I stretch my brain, Alicia, out to try to imagine the things that Claire just said a second ago. I think, Howard Lutnick, is like Howard Yutznick. He's the Commerce Secretary. I think this is objectionable. But the Tesla sale, the Tesla event on the White House lawn was, to me, more objectionable. President of the United States going out and basically telling people to buy this car. I thought that was kind of incredible. Again, kind of eye-poppingly ridiculous. This is, clearly part and parcel of that. But I don't know where it stops. I mean, the president's, the grift, the graft, never ends. And, you may remember there was an incredible the first couple days of the new administration, Trump was doing one of his Oval Office gaggles, and someone talked to him about how his meme stock, his meme coin had soared. And he said, well, how much is it worth now? And whoever the reporter was said, well, it's up to $3 or $4 billion now in market cap. And Trump said, well, he literally said, well, that's chicken feed compared to some of the guys in my cabinet. And this on camera, we can find that clip. It was that was to me a leading indicator of where we're headed. None of this surprises me, and all of it shocks me.
Yes, but here's Here's where I find it confusing. If the political argument that Trump made was they're all insiders and we're the outsiders and we're going to come into power, isn't it obvious now that when he's talking about the new insiders, he didn't mean that he was bringing the rest of us along with him? It meant that he was bringing people who were already had positions of power, people who already had billions of dollars, and he was going to make them richer and then ask the rest of us what we were willing to sacrifice in the interest of making them richer.
Well, make them richer and also, by implication, also make himself richer he's along for the ride on this, right? Yes, you are pointing to the fundamental, a populist movement that is what MAGA has been. And there's the Bannon conception of that, which is genuinely a right-wing nativist populist. And then there's this overlayer of oligarchy smeared across the top of it. It's a fundamental... you heard smeared across the top of it. You just cringed when you heard oligarchy smeared across the top of it. It's a fundamental tension in the coalition, and that Trump is how to manage the fact that, you know, are there going to be people eventually in that movement who wake up and go, hey, wait a minute, like, this isn't a movement for the little guys. This is a movement for the oligarchy and populism are not compatible as ideological or political alliance, as part of the same political alliance. Traditionally, but the question continues to be asked, or really is what MAGA is not populist or oligarchic, it's just culty.
Okay, well, I want to talk about the populism of this, the proposed changes to Social Security that could backfire in a big way on Donald Trump as a judge blocks Doge from accessing personal information from the Social Security database. We're going to get to that after a short break. A federal judge just issued a scathing temporary restraining order against Elon Musk's so-called Doge team, barring them from accessing personal identifiable information from the Social Security Administration. The judge writes that Musk's team is, quote, essentially engaged in a phishing expedition at SSA in search of a fraud epidemic based on little more than suspicion. We are back with Harry, Claire, and John. Harry, your reaction to this ruling and the judge calling it a phishing expedition by Doge.
Yeah, so first, it's one more big area. We have other indications of how they're messing with Social Security that now is on track to have to go through judicial review. But look, this has been Doge's MO. They show up at the doorstep of federal agencies, some of whom welcome them, others who don't. They say, where do I plug in my laptop and get into your systems? Give us all this information. There's reliable reports that people who say you can't do that are literally fired the next day for not just giving the keys to the kingdom over to Doge. And we're talking here all kinds of the treasure trove of private information for American citizens that they just want to, on tissue-thin justification, ransack. And Hollander, you're right, not just firm, but detailed. You can't do this, that, and the third. We have a status report on Monday where I want you to come in and show me you haven't done those things. And now they're in the same situation. Do they try to scream, how can a judge do this? Do they try to jump up to the Court of Appeals because the nerve that they should have to listen to a single district court judge? It's part and parcel of this big theme, and particularly as it applies to Doge, which has really been tyrannical and high-handed, throwing its weight around within the federal government.
Claire, I am old enough to remember when politically it was political suicide to mess with America's seniors, and now you have, there's the piece about information, which I think is really important, but there's also just like the administration of Social Security. You have the SSA saying that anyone who can't use an online account to verify their identity will need to go in person to their local Social Security office. The Washington Post says that could be up to 85,000 customers per week going to local offices, while you have Doge closing dozens of those offices.
Yeah, and what they're doing here, Leisha, is they're really trying to paint people who get Social Security as fraudulent criminals. They're trying to say that huge numbers of people are trying to take money that they're not entitled to. And they're doing that primarily because they found people who were dead in the databases. They weren't getting money, those people weren't. No one was sending them checks. They just found them in the databases and they were off to the races, calling everybody on Social Security criminals. And that's not going to work for them politically. I would also say the interesting thing is there's this office called GAO, the General Accounting Office, and they do a number of studies every year where there is waste in government, where there are things that can be done. It was a Bible for me as a former auditor when I came to the Senate, trying to find programs where we could, in fact, eliminate wasteful spending. One of the areas where they could be looking at is Social Security disability. There are instances where people are getting disability without really having the medical evidence to do so. There were mills of doctors giving people disability status without medical evidence to do so. So there are ways to get at the small percentage of fraud that might be there within the Social Security system. The way they're going about it, they are using such a broad brush that they're making Americans who depend on Social Security very nervous, and they're going to turn on Trump if they're not careful completely.
They're making those who rely on it now, but also those of us who hope to rely on it in the future, just absolutely devastating. Harry Littman, Claire McCaskill, John Heilman, thank you all so much for spending the hour with us. We're going to sneak in a quick break. Be right back.